The house Mr. Rogers built is on fire. On July 25, 2025, H.R. 4 became law. Framed as a way to cut spending and tackle the national debt, it rescinded $9.4 billion in approved funding, including $1.1 billion for public broadcasting. For the first time in nearly 60 years, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting found itself defunded. On August 1st, the CPB announced it would wind down operations, leaving thousands of public radio stations and TV stations in serious economic straits. This is, without exaggeration, the biggest crisis public media has ever faced. The funding cuts have already triggered talks of cancellations, layoffs, and even shuttering of entire stations. As the world of public media prepares for what will probably be the toughest period of its entire existence, many journalists, producers, and creatives are wondering, what happened? How you doing? I'm William Padmore, and this is Media Watch. I'm a career reporter with nearly a decade of experience, mostly in public media. I was laid off in March, and now we're giving YouTube a try. Yippee! On this channel, we're going to try to take a critical look at media. Old media, new media, personalities in both, and everything in between. My goal is to help you understand the undercurrents shaping our media ecosystem with a particular emphasis on journalism, my one true love. Today, we're going to take a look at the history of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, how it was born, how it died, and what could be next for public media. Let's get into it. The Public Broadcasting Act was signed in 1967 by President Lyndon B. Johnson. It created the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which eventually led to NPR and PBS. Now, remember one thing about America in 1967, it was a pretty rough place. Vietnam, the Detroit race riots, the Cold War. Public broadcasting essentially got its beginnings as one of Johnson's Great Society initiatives. It was meant to be a counterweight to profit-driven commercial TV, a noble goal. But conservatives had concerns. They warned taxpayer-funded public media could become an ideological weapon or a form of state propaganda. Still, at the time, Democrats ruled Congress. And Johnson wasn't exactly the type of guy you just said no to, especially if you were in his party. Even so, amendments were added, literally stapled on. For one thing, the CPB would remain a private nonprofit. Second, it could not actually own stations, only fund them through grants allocated by the government. And this next one is particularly vital to understand where we are now. Congress had to renew funding for the corporation every single year. This was changed every 2 years in 1976. With those safeguards in place, the Public Broadcasting Act passed with wide bipartisan support. But conservatives still had beef. Concerns about taxpayer subsidies and an elite bias would haunt the CPB literally until its dying day. Johnson signed the act on November 7, 1967. He remarked, "While we work every day to produce new goods and create new wealth, we want most of all to enrich man's spirit. That is the purpose of this act." For the first time in American history, infrastructure was built to give Americans access to entertainment, education, and news completely free of charge. Whether you were on a tractor in Nebraska, an office in New York, or in the mountains of Appalachia, public broadcasting was here for you. It wasn't long before the Corporation of Public Broadcasting faced its real true political test. In 1969, President Richard Nixon tried to cut CPB's budget in half from $20 million to $10 million. At the time, Democratic Senator from Rhode Island, John Pastor, was the chair of the Senate Subcommittee on Communications, which essentially had great sway over whether or not the CPB would receive funding. The thing to remember about Pastor was that he was skeptical about CPB's funding, at least initially. During the subcommittee meeting that would decide CPB's fate, he heard from CPB and FCC chairs and was unimpressed. Then, Fred McFeely-Rogers took the mic. The visibly nervous TV host and puppeteer didn't yell to make his points. No bombast, not even any real charisma. Just a few statements and a song about explaining feelings to children. Public broadcasting survived untouched. Mr. Rogers stepped up in the biggest way. He effectively rizzed a nation. And for generations, that clip would become the defining moment in public media history. From the 1970s through the 1990s, public media didn't just survive, it thrived. PBS and NPR exploded with hits that cemented their place in the nation's zeitgeist. Sesame Street, Reading Rainbow, Morning Edition, The Joy of Painting, Car Talk, you name it, they had it. During that same time period, the number of public media TV and radio stations also jumped. Even NPR's 1983 near bankruptcy ended with a $10 million bailout from the CPB, plus an undisclosed donation from the Ford Foundation. Why? Because public broadcasting was just that important to the culture of America at the time. However, even during public media's golden age, conservative concerns simmered. In the 1990s, Newt Gingrich made defunding PBS and NPR cool again with conservatives. He branded CPB welfare for the artsy-fartsy left, and he wasn't alone. The Heritage Foundation argued CPB was obsolete and low-key not even that good, and funding was cut slightly in 1995. But political pushback diffused attempts to eliminate the CPB entirely. For the time being, public media was basically untouchable. Through Bush-Obama, PBS and NPR kept higher trust in commercial outlets, but the partisan gap was widening. By Obama's second term, GOP trust was sliding hard. Funding still came through, though, and appropriations increased. Obama even used Republican calls to defund PBS as a re-election talking point. Meanwhile, NPR and PBS were working to rely less and less on government funding and more on individual donations and underwriting. Underwriting is essentially an advertisement, but it's under a different legal jurisdiction. It's confusing. By this point, one thing was clear. If conservatives wanted to take down the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, it would take a seismic political shift. Uri Berliner, a senior business editor for NPR for 25 years, published a bombshell of an essay in 2024. In it, he basically gave credence to conservative complaints that NPR specifically had developed an elite liberal bias and a kind of groupthink. Now, in my opinion, the essay had a lot of good points. That's something for another video, not something we're going to cover here. The important thing to remember is, at the time when NPR was already struggling with perceptions of bias, here came an insider fueling the flames. Berliner would publish his essay in the Free Press on April 9th, 2024. On April 16th, he was formally punished by NPR for violating its policies, 5 days suspended without pay. Berliner resigned a day after that punishment was handed down. Now, it is very important to note that Berliner was not advocating for the defunding of CPB with his letter, just giving some strong critiques. However, the damage was done. Since his very first term, President Trump has loved to bash the media. NPR and PBS have been no exception. After Berliner's essay, he posted on Truth Social, "No more funding for NPR, a total scam. They are a liberal disinformation machine, not $1. Leading up to H.R. 4, Trump made his intent very clear. He would refuse to support Republicans who refused to vote for it. As soon as he sent that post, public media's fate was sealed. And Democrats? In no position to argue. Republicans control Congress, and President Trump isn't exactly the kind of guy you just say no to, especially if you're in his party. Subsidies for public broadcasting were effectively dead. For conservatives, it was an easy win. consequences for their rural constituents be damned. Well, the truth of the matter is, if you're in a big city, it probably doesn't matter all that much, at least not right now. Public radio relies on donations, with the CPB filling major gaps. When you hear all those funding drives on the radio and on your public TV stations saying, hey, we rely on your support, we can't do this without you, they're not kidding. Large stations in urban districts often have a larger pool of donors to pull from, and they're often wealthier. They'll scrape by with layoffs and cuts. Smaller stations like South Dakota Public Radio, where the CPB made up 20 to 30% of their budget, face some rough times ahead. PBS just announced it's slashing its budget 21% across the board. That is massive. Supporters call this a tragedy. Some of these outlets are the only reliable news source in their communities, especially during disasters. So where does public media go from here? I'll give you 3 options. 1. Renew the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. You could renew the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. I'm sure you'd find a few advocates who would be for it, but it would probably be a shadow of its former self, especially if conservatives had any considerable way in its creation. Second, there's always private equity, but when private equity and newsrooms tangle, it usually ends up as a bloodbath, so maybe not. Third, there's a strong case of doing nothing. Many stations will likely innovate from this and find new funding streams, while smaller stations sure will suffer. On the other hand, I'm sure many people in the public broadcasting world right now are very, very relieved not to have that political sword of Damocles hanging over their head all the time. The house Mr. Rogers built endures. It is damaged, but it endures. The paint is peeling, the roof is leaking, and the rooms are a little bit emptier now. What was once a shared national space where a kid in rural Alaska and a retiree in Florida could watch the same show and hear the same news is fracturing. Pieces sold off, others left to wither. Maybe it survives in the free market, maybe it adapts and thrives, or maybe it becomes another institution we only appreciate when it's gone. Either way, the lights are flickering. And for many communities, when they finally go out, there's no replacing them. If you care about the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, please leave a comment below, and please remember to like and subscribe. I don't know if I mentioned, but I was laid off and I am severely underemployed, so for more videos like this, you'd really be supporting my channel if you click like and subscribe. I'm William Padmore, and I'll see you on the next one.